Hello, everyone. I'm Sukeert Shanker. I'm the founder and CEO of Aeldra, and I'm delighted to have Greg Kidd with us. Greg is a legendary investor in Silicon Valley and an early investor in a lot of companies that are now global names, including Twitter, Square, Ripple, Coinbase, Robinhood, and many others. And Greg, thank you so much for joining. It's tremendously exciting to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, and excited about your future there too.
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So why don't I start with a quick introduction, Greg, that of you, and I'll try to do it justice. He founded Dispatch Management, a company with a messaging platform for couriers, and this is where he met and hired Jack Dorsey, the founder and CEO of Twitter. Greg was then at the Federal Reserve and then Promontory, a regulatory and compliance consulting firm. And he was also an angel investor. And as I mentioned, he's an early investor in Twitter, Square, Coinbase, Ripple, Robinhood. So that's quite a track record over many, many years. And he was also an early investor in Aeldra. And I'm hoping that over time, Aeldra gets spoken about first when they talk about Greg's portfolio. What advice do you have for Aeldra, and what do you read into Aeldra, and what we've done since you first invested and where we are, which is we are out in the market. We've solved some really hard problems. What is your expectations, and what do you think about what we're trying to do?
Well, the thing I'm really exciting is that you guys have a simple principle, a simple insight. And like an example is you're signing up people for FDIC insured accounts in the US, and they don't have a social security number or a tax identification number, clearly because they're not Americans. They live overseas. And the question is like, why would they have those? And some people have this like head in the sand attitude, like, well, you've got to have that for like identification, for like KYC. And I'm like, well, come on, a tax ID, which is something you can get on the dark web for anyone, it's a terrible way of authenticating someone as being who they are. And if they're not an American, they're not under American taxes. And so the fact that you guys have been creative enough to come up with a risk-based scheme that lets people proof their identity sufficiently so that you can meet your risk and compliance needs in the US for people that aren't in the US, that means the other 95% of the people that don't live here can have the benefit of here. Take that insight that you can have risk and compliance without doing things the same old head in the sand kind of way that is predominated for like the last 40 years, and make it work in one country, then another country, and then you're on the road to saying everybody has a seat at the table. That simple message and hammering it home that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail approach. That's why I signed on, and you guys are, you're showing the way. And I use your example to beat up on my other companies in my portfolio that say, well, no, it can't be done. I'm saying, no, what you're saying is you don't know how to do it. It can be done. They're doing it. You're just telling me it can't be done. It would be like watching the movie, The Wizard of Oz. And when the wizard tells Dorothy, go get me the witch's broom, Dorothy brings back all these people that say, look, I found all these people that say getting the broom is impossible. And he's like, that's not what I asked you to do. I told you to bring me the broom, and you guys have the broom. All right. So I'm going to point, if they can do it, you can do it. Right. And as long as you're leading, then everyone else will be following. And so I just encourage you to double down, on what you're doing, and just extend, the scope and make it a seat at the table for everyone.
And it is ultimately about, to that point, equality and equal access and democratization and so on and so forth, right? So it's basically empowering people who, just because they were born in a certain place, are restricted to that certain place, whereas their lifestyles, their outlooks, and so on and so forth are, pretty much global, right?
Yeah, I mean, it is a funny thing. The access issue is a twin thing. There's sort of a competing set of values. People talk about equality, but they also talk about liberty. And some people say, well, if you have too much liberty, that hurts equality. And if you have too much equality, that hurts liberty. But the interesting thing when you talk about access access in terms of inclusion, giving people a seat at the table, you're going to get people that are concerned about liberty in that conversation and equality. Instead of those becoming competing values, they can become complementary values. You can have a system where the amount of liberty actually creates a form of equality, because the access we're talking about, it doesn't really matter whether you're rich or poor, man or woman, old or young. You either have access or not, and that's a form of liberty, but it's also a form of equality. And so for these types of things of access to an account, you may have more money or less money, but you could have a lot of money, but if you don't have access to a certain type of account, like in your case, the ability to bank your money in the United States, you may feel like at a disadvantage to someone who has a lot less money, but has that access, right? That access is a critical thing, both from an equality point of view, but also a liberty point of view. The jury's out. I mean, I'd like to say that with a change of administration, there'll be more clarity. There'll be more of a move toward a principle-based approach versus like very heavy prescriptive, top-down statutory methods. But Joe Biden comes from from an era, we had 8 years of Obama, and we didn't see a lot of principle-based regulation under that regime. There were almost no new bank charters issued. It was extremely hard to innovate. There was some more room for innovation under the Trump administration, primarily because there was so much chaos that nobody was really paying attention. Now neither of those, like if you were like a referee for a football game, having like super over prescriptive rules, or simply being chaotic and not paying attention to the game, neither of those would be great for a fintech or regtech environment. So the US, it's got like great weather, lots of money, but it's got pretty much a hellish regulatory regime. They got a lot of good regulators, but you got too many regulators. It's having 3 sets of referees. Like, is it a commodity? Is it a currency? Is it a stock? Is it a derivative? I mean, you have that going on in the US, which is, is creating enough chaos that some of the innovation or a lot of the innovation, good innovation, is happening outside of the US. I have to confess that the bulk of my efforts and my teams are actually based outside of the US now. I still like the weather here. It's easy to raise money here and make money here, but that doesn't mean that it's the best place for innovation. The US still succeeds sort of in spite of these problems, but there are a lot of other really amazing places now, whether, like you mentioned, China, India, things that are happening in Europe, all around the world. I do expect to find my next set of successes in a much more distributed basis than what I've found for the last 20 years. And I'm excited about that. But the US is not a leader in regulatory clarity. It is a huge, huge laggard.
Hey, Greg, so one last final brief question. So,
Sure.
You had this employee, Jack Dorsey, he had this big idea. You said, hey, I'll support you. When did you have the realization, boy, this is going to be a global phenomenon? And what did you do? Did you go out and get champagne? What did you do?
No, in fact, as usual, whenever Jack had an idea or an insight, like usually I didn't get it the first time or the second time. If I was smarter and was more insightful, I would be user number 2 on Twitter, but I'm not. I'm user number 62. That meant after Jack, who was user number 1, that meant there's like 60 people that got it faster than I did, right? And so, that's my bad. And, I have to accept that, I'm not as good as I could or should be. So I am a little slow. So that's it. And I've been slow on other things. I've missed out on things. I mean, I had the folks present the Revolut idea to me, and I was like, well, you could lose money on every time you do a transaction. You make the most money on the people that don't do anything. And they're like, yeah, but it worked, And so there are some that I had the chance to invest in that I missed out on, and I you need to remind yourself both about your failures as well as your missed opportunities, and understand that we're all human, and not beat up on ourselves too much. I'm still beating up on myself on that one, but that's it. But again, it is the Woody Allen, it's mostly about showing up. And, entrepreneurs are just the people that show up more than most other people. Not that other people don't show up in other ways, but entrepreneurs show up in a particular way where they're willing to accept a very, very high rate of failure. And they have to separate out the failure being a personal failure from just being like maybe the right person, but in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you can't know when a pandemic is going to come along and help Zoom put wind in your sails, right? And so there's some of that there, but you have to have the sails up to catch the wind when it comes.
Right. No, that's terrific, Greg. Once again, thank you so much. This has been amazing. And, I think everyone who sees this and hears it is going to be truly inspired. So thanks again for everything, for taking the time. I know you're a really busy guy, but thank you very much.
Hey, enjoy the journey. Take care.